Please be seated. The court is now in session, and the chamber would like to give the floor to lead co-lawyer to put question to the witness. You may proceed.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon to you, to your honors, and to all of you. Good afternoon, Mr. Panchaud. This morning we stopped when we were talking about the second series of observations included in your 1978 report and in your articles in Le Monde newspaper. And you said that these observations were based on accounts, but also based on the radio broadcasts you were listening to, and that a friend of yours would pass on to you. Now I'd like to look at a third series of observations that appear in your report, in which you speak about various violations. And this third series of observations concern the rebuilding or the re-education of the person who doesn't follow the instructions of Ankar, and the elimination of those who do not follow these instructions at all. You speak about executions in your report. And yesterday, Judge Lavergne read out an excerpt from this report to you regarding doctors, engineers, teachers, students. And I would like to refer to what you wrote in Le Monde on 18 February 1976 at ERN French 0041 325, English 00609 109, and Khmer 0083 24 91. And you say, in February 1976, and I quote, free translation, the person who does not follow Ankar's instructions is sentenced to, quote-unquote, construction, a term which is synonymous with a reprimand coupled with punishment, food deprivation, standing in the hot sun, etc. If such persons do not mend their ways, they are sent to disciplinary facility for collective training. And if they disobey orders from Ankar for the third time, they are summoned to the quote-unquote supreme organization, Ankar Le, from where no one returns. And once again, what you're saying here in this report and in this article is it based on accounts that you heard, on many, many accounts that you were apprised of?
Effectivement, c'est tiré d'un grand nombre de...
Indeed, this is based on...
I got information from witnesses who told me.
Dans votre rapport.
And in your report to the UN, you write in your first sentence, after having reviewed the accounts of hundreds of refugees, it is quite clear that we can establish the truth as follows. So, is your certainty based on the convergence of these accounts and of the usage of the same words in these accounts? Is it based on common references, on common details?
Those are not only the accounts of the refugees. These accounts are also consistent with the broadcast of the Democratic Cambodia radio. This morning, I said the Cambodian revolution had 3 stages. The first stage was about the national revolution. In that stage, they destroy those who were not real people, who were enemies, who served the Americans and Tribunal. So they kill soldiers and civil servants, high-ranking officials in all cities. I got information from the Khmer radio.
Merci.
Thank you. And since I don't have much time, I'm going to ask you, please, to answer very concisely and very precisely to my last questions. I'd like to now bring up a fourth series of observations you made in your 1978 report and in the articles you wrote for Le Monde. And this fourth series of observations on what was happening in democratic Kampuchea concerns the specific treatment reserved for certain groups. Yesterday, Judge Lavergne read out an excerpt from the report that you presented to the Commission of Human Rights. I'm not going to read it again, but I'll read another excerpt which is on the following page, and this concerns a specific group. And I quote, those who were the wealthiest were executed, as well as the monks, a few days after the revolutionary victory. Others were grouped in special camps and forced to lead a lay life as of 1976. And the pagodas that were not destroyed during the war were transformed into warehouses or had other profane usages. Buddha statues were destroyed and most often broken. And the Muslims are persecuted in particular. Christian and animist religions have no possibility of expressing themselves. And I'm going to read to you very, very quickly an excerpt from the article that you wrote in Le Monde newspaper on the 17th of February 1976, and you stated regarding the army, an impressive number of accounts coming from all different backgrounds confirms that there were purges of the quasi-totality of military and administrative officials. And in the article of the following day, on the 18th of February 1976, you write, and it is the same regarding Islam that is practiced by 150,000 Cham, or Khmer Islam. Accounts speak about persecution, about destruction of religious books, of the obligation to eat pork, and of being forced to give up a certain vestimentary. These observations that you mentioned back then during the Khmer Rouge regime, are they based on a great number of accounts or not?
Yes, I got many accounts from monks. Since January 1976, there were no monks. There were no more monks. There were only a few monks who could be used by Khmer leader. Since January 1976, there were no more monks. Monks were forced to live their monkhood. With regard to the Cham, I got some more information from different sources, as you have mentioned. I do not believe that the Khmer Rouge mistreated the Cham based on religious principle. The ethnic Cham had their own tradition, and the Khmer Rouge wanted all the people to do the same thing. So those who agree to follow the Khmer Rouge would survive, no matter they are the ethnic Cham or the Vietnamese. But if they did not follow the Khmer Rouge, they would be in danger. Since 1978, the situation became strange. They searched for the Muslim, the Khmer Islam. Because of the conflict between Cambodia and Vietnam, and ethnic Cham were suspected to support the Vietnamese.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. And now I'm coming to a fifth series of observations that you make in your report to the UN. And that probably will not surprise many of us. In this report, you speak about marriage. And you say, regarding this, on the second page of your report, that if there were cases of forced marriages between young city girls and disabled veterans, this was not generalized. In order to get married, however, young men and young women depended entirely on Angkar's will. What you indicate here is does this also result from accounts that you gathered then?
I got a lot of accounts regarding the marriage arranged by Angkar. Women who rejected the marriage with Khmer Rouge soldiers who were handicapped committed suicide. Those women committed suicide. I know two couples who live with each other until now. Their marriage was arranged by Angkar. I would like to say that Angkar was the parents of the people. According to the Cambodian tradition, parents arrange the marriage for their children. So Angkar had the right to arrange the marriage for their children. I do not like that practice, but of course this is the view of Angkar.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Aside from these 5 series of observations, which for me, of course, are crucial, and also for you because you qualify all this as violations, and in Le Monde you brought up 2 points as well, 2 points that I would like to read out to you before I put questions to you. The first is at ERN French 004110 324, English 00609-105, and Khmer 00832-487. And you say in this article in February 1976, refugees divide the people between the old people, those from the liberated zone before 1975, and the new people who were liberated on the 17th of April 1975. These new people are still considered prisoners of war and have no rights whatsoever. And I'm going to quote a second excerpt from the article of 18 February 1976, ERN French 00410325, English 00609-110, and Khmer 00832-492. And you say, at the end, the absence of medicine, work without stop, makes us envisage an incredible loss of human life. So these observations are made 9 months after Phnom Penh fell. Are these observations based on accounts that you heard from refugees?
Yes, I got the accounts from a refugee who said that many people were killed. In every family, people die. There was a study to find out within 1,000 family how many people were killed or died during the Khmer Rouge regime. I said that 800,000 were killed during the Khmer Rouge. André Fontaine, the president of Le Monde, called me and said that I exaggerated. And I said, no, I did not exaggerate. At the time, CIA said 1 million people, 1.4 million people were killed. And foreign ambassador said that 1 million people were killed. And I said only 800,000 were killed. And I did not remember the exact source.
Sir, may I interrupt you? I have to interrupt you because I would like to proceed with my questions, and the exact number of victims is not what I would like to focus on the most today. And just to finish off, I would like to read a few excerpts of civil party statements, civil parties who testified in December 2012. And since I don't have much time, I will just read out one, and I'll ask you if this excerpt has a few similarities with what you heard in 1975 or 1976 or 77 or even 78 when you were interviewing refugees. So are there any similarities between what the civil parties said in October, November 2012 and what you heard? And the excerpt is in the transcript. It is E1/146.1. It is from 4 December 2012 and is at 2:07 in the afternoon and 38 seconds. And Ms. Tung Sagat says the following, free translation. She speaks about forced evacuation 2 that you brought up yourself, in fact. And she says, it took us all day. It didn't start early in the morning. And we were gathered at around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. They made us board a truck. And then later, we were transported towards this place. And we arrived on site at the end of the afternoon. And it took a long time because the roads were no good. And there was no break along the way. The Khmer Rouge would go into the forest to relieve themselves, but we were not allowed to step off the truck. And it's only when we arrived in Pursat that we were allowed to step off the truck. And a question is put to her, did you take a freight car or did you take a passenger car on the train? And she answers, we were grouped in a freight car that was empty. And she describes the rest of her journey. Can you tell us, quickly speaking, if this resembles what you heard maybe 35 or 36 years ago?
I agree 100% with this account.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Well, I am done with my questions. I would like to thank you for your contribution to this work of justice taking place here. In Cambodia, as you know, there are civil parties and victims and other Cambodians who are expecting a lot from this court. This court, of course, does not intend to cover everything, but it's already something that's very, very important. A lot of people are expecting a lot. So on their behalf, I would like to thank you for your contribution to this work of justice.
The President, thank you. Next, we would like to cede the floor over to counsels for Mr. Kyew Samphan to put some questions to this witness. Counsel Kung Som-on. Thank you, Mr. President, and Your Honors. I am Kung Som-on, representing Kyew Samphan, along with my colleague. I have a few questions for the witness. I may seek some clarification from you. You have mentioned about Mr. Kyew Samphan, and you said you met him once 8 years ago, and you knew you heard of Mr. Kyew Samphan even back in Sihanouk's regime. Can you tell the chamber when exactly did you become to know Mr. Kyew Samphan or hear of Mr. Kyew Samphan? Response: I heard of him in Sangkum Rih Niyom or Sihanouk's regime, and as I already mentioned, I knew him to be the clean person, the person who believes in justice, a person who would like to find justice, and he was mistreated by the police right in front of the assembly, and I still admire him greatly. And Prince Sihanouk, in his statement, tried to mistreat Mr. Kyew Samphan. He tried to arrest Mr. Kyew Samphan, and on one occasion said that these 3 people were dead. And the Chinese embassy talked about Prince Norodom Sihanouk, who said that the dead bodies of these 3 individuals, including Hu Nam and Hu Yun, were plunged into a pit, and that they regarded him as the ghost minister. Counsel Kung Som-on. Mr. Witness, could you please just be more concise on the time? When did you learn of his name? Response: it was in 1966, a year after I arrived in Cambodia. Question: yesterday you also mentioned Kyew Samphan, who wrote something on the Observer. Did you also read those articles, or you only have heard of him having written such articles? Response: I was in the countryside. I heard people talked about this. I didn't read the articles myself, and King Norodom Sihanouk at that time ordered the closure of the Observer. Question: just now you mentioned about the police in Sangkum Rih Niyom, and that Kyew Samphan were undressed in front of the assembly. Do you know what was the reason behind this? Response: Ku Run, the head of the police, and I don't know the reason behind this. He had to do that, and perhaps Kyew Samphan did not agree to sign on a commercial agreement. And we also heard the guy or the person was bragging off about having undressed Mr. Kyew Samphan before the assembly. Question. I believe that, and you said that Mr. Kyusampon was not willing to take bribe. That's why he was mistreated. Can you clarify a little bit on this? Why a clean person like him was mistreated? Response. It is very normal, even during current days. Clean people who do some harms to some other people, in a sense, would then be not wanted. Question. You also talked about Mr. Kyusampon, who was holding a position in the Ministry of Commerce. Did you know Mr. Kyusampon very well when he was still holding that senior position? Response. I did not have any interest in the government. I spent most of my time in the countryside living with the peasants. So I'm afraid I cannot respond to your question because I don't know about this. Question. You called Mr. Kyusampon Mr. Clean. Can you tell the chamber how you could call him like that? Did you hear villagers say so? Response. Youth, intellectuals, teachers used to call him Mr. Clean because teachers did not like then Prince Norodom Sihanouk because they believed that he was leading a corrupt government. Question. To the best of your recollection, how can you describe Mr. Kyusampon's popularity back then? Response. During that time, the youth and teachers and intellectuals had wisdom. They would like to free their country from being under the rule of the monarch. And for that, I can say that Mr. Ieng Sari and Salot Saw, who were the teachers at the Cambodia school, they were much appreciated and they were believed to be following communism. Question. With regard to the event that Mr. Kyusampon had to flee to Kampot, do you know the reason behind his fleeing to Kampot? Response. It was because villagers in Samlot revolted against the government who grabbed their land. They grabbed the land to pave way for the sugar factory. And peasants were unhappy and they stole some weapons or rifles from the soldiers. And then Prince Norodom Sihanouk cursed Mr. Kyusampon, Hunam and Huyun. He accused them of being the traitors. And the prince said that his subjects, his children and people would never do such thing against him without anyone behind them. And when this happened, I was still young, and I went to the cinema, and before we watched the movie, an episode of Priep An being tied to a pole and fired at by soldiers. He was shot dead, and the video footage of such ordeal was shown in movie before each movie was being shown. Indeed, we respect the prince, King Norodom Sihanouk. However, when it comes to power, King Norodom Sihanouk was not familiar with how the power would be properly distributed. Question: can you also tell the chamber, please, the relation between the revolt, the rebellion that happened in Samlod, and why it was connected to Khieu Samphan? Response: I did not conduct a study or research on this. However, I believe that this incident was not relevant or not interrelated, but the Khmer Rouge and including Khieu Samphan and other people fled to Samlod, and a group of Democratic Cambodia soldiers were organized. Mr. Khieu Samphan, according to my knowledge, was not engaged in this. Nonetheless, I have not done any study on this to verify it. Question: after the disappearance of Mr. Khieu Samphan and after you heard people talked that the government had to douse the dead bodies of these three people in acid. What can you tell us more about this? Response: I at that time was convinced that he and the other people were dead. But later on, we learned that he did not die because he emerged to welcome Prince Norodom Sihanouk coming to Cambodia. But at that time, in Phnom Penh, we were still not convinced because it was, we believe, part of the Khmer Rouge propaganda that these people dead are alive. But we, in 1978, saw Prince Norodom Sihanouk and his wife when Prince Norodom Sihanouk was hugging Khieu Samphan when they visited Kulen Mountain. With that, I was convinced that Khieu Samphan could have not died. He was not a ghost, or otherwise he would be a ghost who has already now reborn. Question: did you know what Mr. Khieu Samphan could have been doing when he re-emerged? Response: I did not have great interest in this. There were wars, there were concerns, and we were overwhelmed by these worries already. We were too overwhelmed with these worries to think about Khieu Samphan. And nonetheless, we believe that the Khmer Rouge would like to show the world that Mr. Khieu Samphan was a clean, innocent person. That's why they would like to show his picture be near then Prince Norodom Sihanouk. Question. I would like to go back a little bit to the Italian journalist, Mr. Cristiana. Do you still recall his name? Response. This is a shameful thing. Mr. Cristiana talked about Mr. Khieu Samphan, but he never met him. He never met Khieu Samphan. He was a big liar because he never met Khieu Samphan. Question. Can you also tell the chamber how Mr. Cristiana made up all these stories? What makes you believe that he made this all up? Response. Frankly, I don't remember this very well, but Mr. Cristiana formed a group, and they created some or made up some stories against the Democratic Cambodia, which was the communist society. And to me, I can see that these people would like to do anything opposing the communist state. Council Kong Som-on, Mr. President, I would like to have this document be put up on the screen, document E/608. Mr. Kong Som-on, Mr. Witness, could you look at this paper and see whether it is part of the article that Cristiana published? Response. This is part of the past. I don't remember this quite well, but I met a journalist who stayed with Paulo, and we met in Colombo, and he talked to me that he never met Khieu Samphan. So I believe that what being said by this paper is not true. Even the interview itself was made up. Council Kung Samon. Mr. President, I would like document document E190.1.353 being handed over to the witness. The President, you may proceed. Council Kung Samon, I would like you to also look at this article of the newspaper about the ignorance of the suffering in the democratic Cambodia, written by Louis Simon. And you may refer to the area with some highlight Eon in Khmer 0081 1089 00 English ERN 0044 5460 and French ERN 0077 5746. I would like to also read the part that you stated. You said you know for sure that the Italian newspapers or the Italian journalist never interviewed or met Khieu Samphan. Do you still stand by that statement, or is that the statement you made to that journalist? The Washington Post on the 19th of February 1978. Is it true? Response. Yes, this statement was what I talked to New York for the Time magazine. And I met the journalist who said that this gentleman never, or this journalist never met Mr. Khieu Samphan before. And later on, there was another journalist who talked bad about Khieu Samphan. They exaggerated the information. They tried to establish bad image of the democratic Cambodia by saying bad things about individuals who were in the democratic Cambodia. So I can see that although some people in the democratic Cambodia could have made some big mistakes, but they still respect people. Council Kung Samon. Thank you, Mr. President and Your Honors and Mr. Witness. I have no further questions, but I would like to cede the floor over to my colleague to continue putting some more questions. The President, thank you, Council. Council for Mr. Khieu Samphan, you may now continue.
Oui, merci, Monsieur.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Father Panchaud. My name is Arthur Verken. I am one of the co-lawyers representing Mr. Khieu Samphan. A few questions for you to clarify a potential misunderstanding, because my colleague was asking you a question about the Washington Post, whereas you were talking about an article that may have appeared in the Time magazine or New York Times. I just wanted to point out that this is an error. But for the record, we are dealing with an original article that was initially published in the Washington Post. A minor detail, but one that I wish to inform you of. To your honor and to your credit, you have decided to speak in Khmer. After all, we are in Cambodia. You are addressing a bench of Cambodian judges. However, one precision I would like to point out is when you speak in Khmer, your words are interpreted into English and then relayed into French. Our interpreters are of the highest caliber. However, you will understand that there is a certain lag and that occurs. And in particular, in regards to something you said yesterday, because of the possible discrepancy, I had to consult my Cambodian colleague and have him clarify what you meant by cosmic revolution. This particular excerpt comes from your testimony that you had commented on. And Sihanouk's reputation prior to the coup d'etat. And you talked about the showing of an Apsara film. You said that intellectuals hated Sihanouk, that he had a very bad reputation, and that there was a clear gap between what intellectuals thought and what more ordinary, simple-minded people thought. So there was some cloudiness or confusion around that. So could you perhaps make explicit exactly what you meant by cosmic revolution?
Response to the peasants. The king is the master of the land and the water. And you may be aware that during the plowing ceremony, the king would be the first person who start plowing this field. And after that, the people can sow, can grow crops. It is the king who creates rains. No king, no rains. So when the assembly decided to topple down the king, peasants felt that they could not do farming because the king was no longer there to create some more rains for them to grow their crops.
Le roi fait la pluie et le beau temps.
According to the French saying, it was the king who creates the sun and the rain. I talked a lot about this, but I would not talk more. Even the former king, King Norodom Sihanouk, and when Charles de Gaulle came to Cambodia on the 1st of September 1966, King Norodom Sihanouk started to tell the world before Charles de Gaulle coming to Cambodia that he would even stop the rain from coming. And indeed, he would like to tell the world that he would be the best king ever. And when Charles de Gaulle came, indeed, sure enough, there was no rain. I would not wish to talk more about this, as I already said a lot.
Vous aviez dit aussi.
Yesterday, in response to a question put to you by Mr. President, you said that intellectuals detested Sihanouk when he was in power. And in fact, you put it in comparison with the Apsara film. Could you please tell us why?
Response. The term hatred in French that you said would be too strong to describe the sentiment of the students. They just did not like the former prince. When students who came from France they would like to get some power from the king, but the king was not ready to relinquish this power to the students. We talk about Khieu Samphan, Hunam, and Huyun, but we at the same time forget that there is another person by the name of Chao Seng, who was a Cambodian, a communist who got married to a French woman, and he was the Minister of Education. So in all educational departments, these departments were under the supervision of the communist leaders. So these people who loved communism did not like King Norodom Sihanouk. And since King Norodom Sihanouk did not want to share power, and because the country was hampered by corruption and injustice, that's why this thing happened. With regard to Apsara movie, I was at Stung Trang. I was teaching French to some Khmer students at a high school. We were forced to watch that movie. And this movie showed that there was no cattle, no ox carts, no peasants in the city. There were only life for the rich. Even Mr. Sostan Fernandez, who really didn't like gambling, he was the one who made this all happen. Right. Mr. Sostan Fernandez was in charge of eliminating or suppressing gambling, but at the same time he was the ringleader of this gambling network.
Father Poncho, please, because you know what you're saying, but you don't know what I'm hearing. And what I'm hearing does not make any sense. So That's why I would like that's why I'm interrupting you. So what is the relation here with the film Apsara? I don't understand. I don't want to get into the detail of the translation, but still, it's just a very simple question. Okay, please speak to me. If you could speak to me in French, if the chamber is okay with that, but maybe that will make things easier. I don't know. Apsara staged a story that was taking place in Phnom Penh where we saw no peasant, no cart, no ox cart, and where those in charge of the government were acting like hooligans, like gangsters. Sostan Fernandez, who was in charge of suppressing gambling, was leading a casino. Nek Chilung, the father-in-law of Sam Ransi, the head of the army, was completely decadent. So the people in the countryside were saying, is that what Phnom Penh is about? Is that what Sihanouk's government is about? They could only be flabbergasted. And I understand very clearly that the communists were furious against Sihanouk and wanted to destroy him. Thank you. Now I understand the relation between the film and the reaction that this film might have caused against Sihanouk. And regarding this, and to continue in a chronological way, I would like you to speak to us now about the way the regime, the Lon Nol regime, dealt with the image of the ex-king, or Sihanouk's image, therefore, once he was deposed. How did the Lon Nol regime deal with this issue?
Just now, I criticized the regime under Sihanouk, but Lon Nol administration made a big mistake too, because they distorted information in order to defame Sihanouk. Following the ousting of Sihanouk on the 18th of March 1970, from the 19th of March onward, the Democratic Cambodia radio made announcement on air that Sihanouk was very naughty, was notorious. He lived in a luxurious life. He ate rice in a plate made of gold, so on and so forth. So these were all the criticism and defamation of Prince Sihanouk at that time. So what they wanted to do was to defame him, and Prince Sihanouk at that time found it unacceptable, and he found it unbearable too.
Father Poncho, please, can you tell us again who would calumniate Sihanouk? I heard the Khmer Rouge radio. So here's an example of the difference between what I understand and what you're saying in Khmer. But maybe there would have been the same problem had you been speaking in French, the other way around. But this is what I heard. So can you please repeat who would degrade, correct interpreter, Sihanouk in this manner?
I think it is easier for me to speak in French to avoid any confusion through translation.
Please proceed. It's not the Khmer Rouge who were criticizing or insulting Sihanouk. The Khmer Rouge practically did not exist. Maybe there were 3,000 to 5,000 fighters, and they were not directly in Phnom Penh for the moment. So it's the radio and especially the papers, and I can show you cartoons as well, and I can also show you cartoons in Cambodian papers that are absolutely horrible in relation to Prince Sihanouk, where we can see cartoons of Sihanouk and of Monique making love in all different possible ways. This is, of course, not something that is acceptable for a head of state, even if he's been overthrown. Every head of state deserves respect, even if he is our political enemy. So Sihanouk was not able to accept that, of course. And in fact, he says it himself in his Chronique de Guerre et d'Espoir. If they had simply deposed me, I would have maybe gone to Mougins in France, and I would have stayed there, that's all. And then I would have just ended my life peacefully. But as a Khmer, he could not accept or he could not react to this kind of insult. And when Khmer people lose face, they're even capable of committing suicide to cleanse their honor. So I'm convinced that Prince Sihanouk supported the Khmer Rouge, of course, because he was a bit of a nationalist, but also and above all, in order to cleanse his honor, even if this meant the death of many Cambodians. Even our French compatriots, a certain Mr. Laporte, wrote horrible editorials about Sihanouk, which a Khmer worthy of this name cannot accept under no circumstances. So, the answer that you have just provided me leads me to get back to another aspect of what you were talking about, which you just told us. I don't know what you were saying. Even if this cost the lives of many Cambodians, you said that, and you also wrote in your book and in numerous articles that you yourself, in fact, wished, and even said it here, wished this revolution. You thought that it was justified. You thought it was expected. And you thought that people desired this cleansing. There were good intentions behind it. You wrote it. So here we have the impression suddenly that you maybe are jumping ahead a bit too much, but you're saying that when he was supporting the Khmer Rouge, the king was already aware of what was going to happen.
Never be confused.
Avec grand...
Okay, please don't mix up the dates. If I supported, I didn't really support the revolution, the Khmer Rouge revolution. I simply noted at the end of the Lon Nol regime that there was no hope in Cambodia for the Cambodian people under Lon Nol. So the only hope was maybe the Khmer Rouge. Okay, we were wrong, but I continue believing that this was the only possible hope for the Cambodian people. In the days of Sihanouk, we were hoping that the Sihanouk regime was going to improve. It was possible. It was a regime that could improve. So then, of course, we were not obviously in favor of the revolution back then. There were many, many students, professionals who were against Prince Sihanouk, but not necessarily as revolutionaries. Even if we look at the Khmer Rouge, Mr. Khieu Sampha, Hu Yun, Hu Nim, Chau Seng, were believed in a revolution coming from the top. That is, that they were going to take the power, the ministerial powers from the top, and then install a regime, a communist regime that is fairer. Whereas there was another branch of the Khmer Rouge, those who went to Ondong Mies, Salut Sar, Pol Pot therefore, Ieng Sari, Roshanto Rosamun, Son Sen, who had decided since 1963 that there was only one single possible solution to put an end to Sihanouk's feudalism, was to overthrow Sihanouk with arms. So, of course, I was more in favor of Khieu Sampha's idea than in the idea of armed revolution, because you know that when we start using weapons, we don't know where we end up. And Sihanouk in all of this asks Council Verken, who was Sihanouk supporting in your eyes?
The President, witness, please hold on. Wait until you see the red light is on your microphone.
Council Verken, I don't know if this is technically difficult, but here, if you change languages, maybe it causes an issue. I'm not sure, but I think you already said yesterday that if there's a change in language, we have to choose one single language and to stick to that language.
The President, thank you. Yesterday, the witness also made it clear that he would use Khmer language in testifying before the chamber. This is his preference because he can speak Khmer fluently, and I also made it clear to parties and members of the public that once the witness is testifying, he may choose the language of his preference, but he should stick to that language. But even though he can switch between French and Khmer, but one language should be used, because yesterday there was an issue as well concerning the mixture of language in responding and questioning. And if you believe that since the witness is French and you are also a French counsel and you want to communicate in French, it of course serve your interest, and probably it may be favorable for you, but this is not some things that the witness is preferring. And according to the preference of the witness, he prefers to testify in Khmer, and he speaks Khmer fluently to my understanding, because I think that the Cambodian public would understand his Khmer testimony very well, because he speaks very fluently, and if there is any discrepancy, that might have been because of the interpretation. The time is now appropriate. We will adjourn now and resume at 3. Court officer is instructed to facilitate the witness during the break and bring him back to this courtroom by 3 o'clock. Upon coming back, a witness will have to indicate the language that he is going to use in testifying, and I also urge that the interpreter endeavor to render it as accurately as possible.